I was gonna say I don't know how to start this one. I'm not entirely sure I know how to continue it either. This is a commissioned review. It is of a 1997 indie film that I had never heard of. It does not appear to be anywhere on streaming. The person who commissioned me actually sent me a DVD copy. Thank you for that. It's called The Sticky Fingers of Time. This is the kind of movie that's really difficult to even try and assess because it is clearly very limited in terms of what it can do because of the very evident shoestring budget that it was made on. So, whenever something seems like it's not quite pulling together, I'm frequently left thinking, was that because that was the best they could manage, or was that an actual choice that was made? It's been a while since I've seen a movie like this. What it actually reminded me of more than anything was the kind of pretentious stuff that me and some of my friends in college used to watch. Stuff like Nowhere or Following. You know, the sort of stuff that we would watch and think, bet you we could make something like that. This is very much that vibe. And it kind of put me in a weird headspace because of it. All right, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. So this is I'm not going to worry too much about spoilers because if you haven't already seen this movie, the odds that you're going to be able to get a hold of it aren't even that good in the first place. Besides which, I'm not entirely sure how spoilable it is because of the structure and the way it works. Anyways, it's a time travel story. It deals primarily with a woman from the 50s named Tucker and a woman from the 90s contemporaneous to the film named Drew. Now, Tucker is a writer in the 50s who, amongst other things, she wrote up on on a test detonation of the H-bomb, but she was also a pulp novelist. And she suddenly finds herself in 1990s, where Drew, who is an aspiring author with, at best, severe self-esteem issues, at worst, possibly suicidal depression. And they kind of become entangled with each other. There's some other people at play as well. The primary ones being a man named Isaac and a woman named Ophelia. And part of the reason it's hard for me to try and cover the plot is I'm not entirely sure how well I understand it. I think I do, but there's also stuff that I could tell you that it's there, but I also couldn't explain why. I feel like I've got the basics, but there's definitely stuff going over my head. And again, I find myself wondering, is it going over my head because I'm thick and I'm not keeping up with this? Or is it going over my head because of the limited way in which they had to bring across whatever the heck it is that they're doing? I don't know. I feel like trying to assist the acting is a little bit of that in a microcosm, because I don't think any of the performers are bad actors. It's almost impossible for me to judge, because while some of them have continued to work since this thing, it's generally been in very small roles and a lot of TV stuff. So I don't know them. I have nothing to compare it to. That having been said, a lot of the line readings are pretty flat. But since that is across the board and very consistent, it comes across to me more like a directing note and a deliberate choice for how these characters to play these lines, which makes sense since at times it's kind of evoking almost a noirish sensibility. And it doesn't really get particularly wrapped up in the emotional lives of these characters. Like, that's not to say that they are emotionless, but like we're not going to deeply understand these people and what makes them tick. We're largely just going to see what they do and hear them give their reasons for why they're doing it. And it's kind of on you to assess their honesty on that. But these aren't deeply emotional performances. And if it was only a couple of characters who weren't emotional, but there were others who were, I would say it's, some of these is not good acting. But when it's this consistent across the board, I'm thinking that was a deliberate choice. Like, there is one over the top performance, but it's a jackass at a bar. He has one scene. That guy was that guy was something. But there would be these lingering looks and connections between female characters, but then they'd make out with the guy, and I have to wonder if like I would have had a better chance at understanding the sexual politics and the dynamics of it if I'd watched it in the 90s rather than now, when like I have a strong sense of myself and I have much stronger feelings about, best ways to portray these things if you're going to do it. Whereas this, if I'd seen this done at a time when like mainstream movies really floundered, I mean, they still do in a lot of ways, but really floundered with any kind of queer implications at all, I might have been able to better understand what this is doing. I think for me, if there's anything that I say that is kind of the damning thing, because I'm not sure that me saying I don't totally understand it is actually a particularly valid criticism of a movie like this, a movie this weird and shifting in its tone and its sense of time and place and where it's going. I'm not sure that me saying I don't get it serves much purpose. Some people will, some people won't. I didn't. I'm not sure it's a movie that cares if I get it. But what I think is something I can say that is a little bit damning is that it's an 82-minute movie that felt like 2 hours. And that's generally not a good thing. And I did find myself that like there's a point about midway through that was a really good moment. Because one of the things Tucker realized, one of the things that gets found out is that Tucker dies. And dies back in the 50s. And there's a fairly intense moment that happens a little more than midway through where I'm just gonna have to explain this. So like if you want to try and track this down, this is kind of a legitimate spoiler. It's a spoiler of what I think is the best moment in the thing. But again, it's only about halfway through. So Tucker's looking at this old newspaper clipping of her own body face down on the sidewalk, and she notes that like there isn't blood spatter. If she had been shot there, it should be spread out all over the place, but there's just kind of a pool of blood. She says, "I wasn't shot there," and Drew asks her, "Well, where were you shot?" And Tucker just has a moment and goes, "Here," as someone enters the apartment they're in and shoots her in the back of the head. And it's a jarring moment that felt really clever. And if this was a short film and it had ended there or very soon after, I'd probably be singing its praises a bit more, because that felt like a strong climactic almost kind of thing. Except it keeps going after that and keeps adding in elements that I wasn't following. And I just don't know what to make of this. It's interesting, but it's interesting in that, very low budget, people had higher ambition than what they were ever going to be able to pull off, almost student film kind of way. That's the way in which it's interesting. I will say that as far as pretentious stuff that I don't fully get, this is probably some of the less offensive stuff that I've seen in the last few years. I remember a few years back. I don't think I did a review of it, but I watched Another Earth, and then later on, somebody commissioned to watch the first 2 episodes of The OA from that same creative team. And holy crap, that stuff was so bad. It had its head stuck so far up its own ass. This is somewhat confusing in a similar way to something like The OA, but it doesn't, while I did kind of call it pretentious, it doesn't seem to be, sticking a periscope up its own rectum the way stuff like The OA does, and really turns me off for doing so. This didn't feel particularly navel-gazing, which is probably its saving grace. Whatever it's doing, it is doing it pretty straightforwardly, and without a lot of, ooh, makes you think kind of nonsense, which I think helps. That said, I'm still not sure I understood. Has anybody out there seen The Sticky Fingers of Time? If you have, I would be fascinated to hear your thoughts. If you have not seen that film, what's a film that you don't know whether or not it's good because you don't have a firm enough sense to feel like you can say whether it was actually good or not? What's a movie like that for you? Whatever it is, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon was how I was commissioned to take a look at this uniquely strange film. But you can support me at any tier. Lots of help there. That is ultimately what pays my bills a heck of a lot more than YouTube does. But even if you're not able to do that, like, share, subscribe, all help me out. Links to other things that I do down in the description. P.O. Box if you want to send something for the shelf. But don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can come on back next time you need a break. Now my thanks to my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Karak, The Thing That Goes Doink in the Anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Udelki, Theo the Boy, Bernabi Lax the Poodle, Zach, Idolin, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Bookworm, Adam, RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shane Gorley, Brendan LaRose, and TT. If you want to hear me possibly butcher your name, check out the rewards on the Patreon. And thanks to all you folks.